What if one simple glance at a stranger in a diner pulled back the curtain on a secret buried for decades? What if that secret was a family connection so unexpected it shakes the very foundation of who you thought you were? Elliot Carver, a 45-year-old billionaire, was accustomed to the world's best luxuries. His tech empire had earned him the kind of power and wealth that most only dream of. Yet here he was, standing on the outskirts of Willow Creek, Ohio, where he had been born, where his mother, Ellen, had died when he was 17, and where his father, Richard, had turned into a stranger. It had been 22 years since he fled at 18, vowing never to return. Yet now, standing outside Mabel's diner, Elliot was overwhelmed with the weight of unresolved questions. He'd come back for closure, to walk the streets of his childhood, to face the house where his mother's laughter had once filled the halls, and to understand why his father had shut him out. Willow Creek hadn't changed. The same sagging porches, the same rusted pickup trucks, and the same diner with its chipped Formica counter and jukebox stuck on Johnny Cash. Elliot slid into a booth, the vinyl creaking beneath him as he ordered a black coffee he had no intention of drinking. It was then that he saw her. Clara Bennett, a woman in her mid-30s, moved with the efficiency of someone who'd worked double shifts for years. Her auburn hair was tied back, loose strands framing a face that was pretty but tired. Her name tag read Clara, and her smile, though warm, was guarded. But it wasn't her smile that caught Elliot's attention. It was the pendant she wore, a silver crescent moon, identical to the one in a faded Polaroid of his mother. His pulse hammered in his chest as he reached for his phone and pulled up the scanned photo. Ellen, young and radiant, wore the same pendant that Clara had around her neck. Elliot's mind raced. It wasn't possible. That pendant was one of a kind, a gift from his father to his mother. Or so he had thought. "Nice pendant," Elliot said when Clara brought him his coffee, his voice tighter than he meant. She touched it absently, her smile flickering. "Thanks. It was my mom's." "Your mom?" Elliot asked, his throat feeling like sandpaper. Clara's eyes narrowed, sensing something off. "Why do you ask?" she replied, her voice steady but defensive. The name meant nothing to him, but it felt like a key turning in a lock. "It's unique," he muttered, letting the conversation fade as Clara walked away. But the feeling gnawed at him. He scribbled a few notes on a napkin. Clara Bennett, Laya, pendant, mom. The pendant, the name, the connection that all felt like something bigger than coincidence. Elliot wasn't a man who left questions unanswered. His empire was built on solving puzzles, on piecing together patterns others missed, and this pendant was a puzzle he needed to solve. Determined to get answers, Elliot started asking locals about Clara. They said she was a fixture in Willow Creek, a single mom to a 10-year-old boy named Max. She worked tirelessly, scraping by on tips and grit. Her mother, Laya Bennett, had died when Clara was just 15, leaving her to fend for herself in a town that hadn't offered much. No one knew who her father was. Laya had never spoken of him. The mystery deepened. Elliot hired Tom Hargrove, a private investigator with a knack for digging up buried truths. Tom was a grizzled ex-cop, the kind who'd seen enough to be unfazed by anything. His first report was sparse but telling. Clara's birth certificate listed Laya Marie Bennett as her mother, father unknown. Laya had lived in Willow Creek in the late 1980s, overlapping with Elliot's parents. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Elliot's next move was personal. He drove to the old Carver house, now boarded up, the paint peeling like dead skin. Standing in the overgrown yard, memories of his mother's soft voice and his father's distant silence washed over him. Richard Carver had been a lawyer, respected but emotionally absent. They had fought bitterly before Elliot left for good. Now, he needed answers. The nursing home was an hour away, a sterile place that smelled of antiseptic and regret. Richard, now 72, sat in a wheelchair by a window. His once sharp features were softened by age, but when he saw Elliot, his eyes lit up, and there was something else there too, something close to fear. "Dad," Elliot began, cutting to the chase, "Mom's pendant, the crescent moon, where did it come from?" Richard's hands trembled as he looked away. "Why are you asking about that now?" he asked, his voice tight. I saw it, Elliot said, his voice low. On a waitress, in town, Clara Bennett. It's the same one. Richard's face went ashen. Leave it alone, Elliot. You don't know what you're stirring up. But Elliot pressed. What aren't you telling me? Why does she have Mom's pendant? Richard clammed up, his jaw tightening. Elliot left, frustrated but determined. He tasked Tom with digging deeper, and the next report brought a bombshell. A letter found in a box of Lia's belongings donated to the Willow Creek Historical Society. It was from Richard, dated 1987 and addressed to Lia. Lia, I can't keep doing this. Ellen's pregnant. I have to stay with her. I'm sorry. The pendant is for our girl. Keep her safe. Elliot read it over and over, the words blurring as the truth hit him like a freight train. Clara was his half-sister. His father had had an affair before he was born, a secret buried for 35 years. The pendant wasn't just jewelry, it was a confession, a piece of his father's shame. The truth was a knife cutting through everything Elliot thought he knew. He watched Clara from a distance now, not as a stranger, but as family. He saw her picking up Max from school, her smile bright despite the shadows under her eyes. He saw her counting tips at the diner, her fingers trembling as she tallied bills. She was strong, but the world had worn her down, and she had no idea she had a brother sitting just 10 feet away. Elliot wrestled with what to do. Telling Clara could upend her life. She had built something stable, though fragile, for herself and Max, but the pendant was a tether, a link to a past they both deserved to understand. He started spending more time at the diner, learning her rhythms. Clara was quick-witted, kind to regulars, and fierce when a drunk got handsy. Max, a skinny kid with auburn hair, sometimes did his homework in a corner booth while Clara worked. One night, Elliot stayed until closing. The diner was empty, the jukebox silent. Clara was wiping down the counter, her pendant catching the light. He took a deep breath. Clara, I need to talk to you about that pendant. She paused, her rag still in her hand. What about it? He slid the photo of his mother across the counter. This is Ellen Carver, my mom. She had the same pendant. Clara's eyes flicked to the photo, then back to him. So it's just a necklace, probably mass-produced. It's custom-made by my father. For your mother, Lia. Clara's face hardened. What are you saying? Elliot told her everything. The letter, the affair, their shared father. Her expression shifted from confusion to fury, and finally, something raw, like grief. You're lying, she said, her voice breaking. Why would you come here and say this? I'm not lying. Elliot pulled out the letter, sliding it toward her. Read it. Clara did, her hands shaking as she read the words. When she looked up, tears streaked her face. My whole life, I thought my dad just left. And now you're telling me he was here? In this town? With a wife and a son? With you? Elliot nodded, his throat tight. I didn't know, Clara. Not until now. She grabbed her coat, her movements jerky. I need to think. Stay away from me. Elliot gave her space, but the truth weighed heavily on him. He went back to Richard, confronting him in the sterile visiting room of the nursing home. You had a daughter, Elliot said, his voice cold, and you let her grow up with nothing. Richard's eyes were wet, his voice barely a whisper. I loved Lia, but Ellen was pregnant. I made a choice. I thought it was the right one. You thought wrong, Elliot snapped. You left Clara to struggle. You left Lia to die alone. Richard broke, confessing everything. He had met Lia at a town fair, their affair brief but intense. When Ellen announced her pregnancy, Richard made a choice to stay with his wife. He had given Lia the pendant as a goodbye, thinking she had left town. He didn't know about Clara until it was too late. Elliot's anger burned, but so did his need to make things right. He found Clara at her apartment, a cramped place with peeling wallpaper and toys scattered on the floor. Max was asleep on the couch, a science book open beside him.
Clara let him in, her face guarded but softer. "I don't want your money or your pity," she said before he could speak. "I'm not offering either. I'm offering family, if you'll have me." Clara's eyes searched his, looking for a lie. Then she pulled out a box from under her bed, filled with Laya's keepsakes. Among them was another letter, one Richard had never known about. "Clara, my heart, your father loved us in his way. He thought I gave you up, but I couldn't. You were my strength. The pendant is his promise, and mine. Forgive him if you can. Live fiercely, my girl." Elliot's breath caught. Richard hadn't just abandoned Laya. He had thought Clara was gone, given up for adoption. The lie had shaped their lives. Clara's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "He didn't even know I existed." Elliot shook his head. "He didn't, but I do, and I'm here now." The revelation changed everything. Clara agreed to meet Richard, but it wasn't easy. The nursing home visit was tense, the air thick with years of unspoken pain. Richard, frail and tearful, told Clara about Laya, her laugh, her courage, the way she had loved fiercely despite everything. Clara listened, her face a mask, but Max, curious and kind, asked questions that softened the room. "Did you ever meet my mom?" Max asked Richard, his small voice cutting through the tension. "I did," Richard said, his voice breaking. "She was wonderful." Clara didn't forgive him, not yet, but she didn't walk away either. Elliot watched, torn between anger at his father and hope for his sister. He started spending time with Clara and Max, small gestures at first, helping with Max's science fair project, bringing takeout when Clara worked late. They talked about Laya, about Ellen, about the lives they'd led apart. Clara was guarded, but she let him in, inch by inch. Then came the second twist. Tom, the PI, uncovered one last piece. A bank account set up by Richard in 1988 in Laya's name. It was small, a few thousand, but it had grown with interest over decades. Richard meant it for Laya, a final gesture he thought she'd never use. She hadn't, because she never knew about it. The account was still there, enough to cover Max's college fund. Clara cried when Elliot told her, not for the money, but for what it meant. Her father had cared, in his flawed way. "Why didn't he tell me?" she asked, her voice raw. He was ashamed. He thought he was protecting everyone. He was wrong. Elliot and Clara built a fragile but real bond. He didn't try to fix her life with his wealth. That wasn't what she needed. Instead, he showed up. He took Max to baseball games, taught him to code, and laughed when Clara teased him about his fancy suits. She in turn shared her world, diner stories, Laya's recipes, and Max's quirky sense of humor. They were siblings, not by choice, but by truth, and they chose to make it work. Richard's health declined, but he lived long enough to see Clara and Max regularly. He never asked for forgiveness, and Clara never offered it, but they found a quiet understanding. Max, with a child's clarity, became the bridge, asking Richard for stories about the past, stories that healed as much as they hurt. Elliot watched, torn between anger at his father and hope for his sister. He started spending time with Clara and Max, small gestures at first, helping with Max's science fair project, bringing takeout when Clara worked late. They talked about Laya, about Ellen, about the lives they'd led apart. Clara was guarded, but she let him in, inch by inch. Then came the second twist. Tom, the PI, uncovered one last piece. A bank account set up by Richard in 1988 in Laya's name. It was small, a few thousand, but it had grown with interest over decades. Richard meant it for Laya, a final gesture he thought she'd never use. She hadn't, because she never knew about it. The account was still there, enough to cover Max's college fund. Clara cried when Elliot told her, not for the money, but for what it meant. Her father had cared, in his flawed way. "Why didn't he tell me?" she asked, her voice raw. He was ashamed. He thought he was protecting everyone. He was wrong. Elliot and Clara built a fragile but real bond. He didn't try to fix her life with his wealth. That wasn't what she needed. Instead, he showed up. He took Max to baseball games, taught him to code, and laughed when Clara teased him about his fancy suits. She in turn shared her world. Diner stories, Laya's recipes, and Max's quirky sense of humor. They were siblings, not by choice, but by truth, and they chose to make it work. Richard's health declined, but he lived long enough to see Clara and Max regularly. He never asked for forgiveness, and Clara never offered it, but they found a quiet understanding. Max, with a child's clarity, became the bridge, asking Richard for stories about the past, stories that healed as much as they hurt. Elliot watched, torn between anger at his father and hope for his sister. 1 year later, at the community center's grand opening, Clara stood at the podium, her voice steady, as she spoke about Laya, about second chances. Max, now 11, grinned from the front row, holding a model rocket he'd built with Elliot's help. Richard was there too, in his wheelchair, his eyes bright with something like redemption. Elliot watched from the back, his heart full. He had come to Willow Creek seeking closure, but he'd found something better, a family he didn't know he needed. As Clara cut the ribbon, the crowd cheering, she caught his eye. She smiled, a real smile, not the guarded one from the diner. He nodded back, the weight of the past lifting. Later, at Mabel's, they sat together. The neon sign buzzed outside. Max was telling a story about his rocket, his hands waving, and Clara laughed, her pendant catching the light. Elliot leaned back, coffee in hand, and realized this was home, not the town, but the people. The pendant had led him here, to a truth that broke him open and made him whole. The story wasn't perfect. There were still scars, still silences, but it was theirs, built on forgiveness, rebuilt from secrets, and stronger for it. As the jukebox kicked on, playing Johnny Cash, Elliot knew he'd keep coming back, for Clara, for Max, for the family they had created.